We're going to get started here. And it is my great pleasure to introduce Paul Chesbro for a presentation today on Osterville history. We are so fortunate to have Paul in our community as the holder of so much of Osterville's rich history, and that he shares it with all of us and gives us the opportunity to record it. Paul is here at the OVL almost daily with books and conversation. So please stop by and have a chat with him. But he does leave for vacation in March, I heard. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Osterville's favorite historian and gardener, Paul Chesbro.
Well, the first question I always ask is, can you all hear me? Can you hear me, John? All right. And I have a voice that carries. Okay, welcome to this talk this afternoon. The sign out front is a little deceiving, a little bit. There wasn't much going on around here during the Revolutionary War. So it includes the War of 1812, Mexican War, Civil War, and World War I. I'd also like to welcome my friends over here on Sunset Lane. They said they were going to tune in on, I guess it's called Zoom. I will try to bring to light Osterville and its involvement in the Revolutionary War through World War I. If you didn't know this, there was no such village known as Osterville until the close of the War of 1812, when Osterville got its present name. Either you don't have these books or you don't carefully read them. For all that information is explained in the 3 volumes. The village of Barnstable, on the other side of the Cape, seems to be the village where rallies were held during the Revolution. How news about the war got to what we know as Lovell's neighborhood, now Osterville, I suppose was by foot, horseback, stagecoach. What condition the roads were in, I am sure were just cart paths. Records say that in 1855, there were 456 people living in Osterville. Did this mean children as well? I don't know. How many were living here during the Revolution? My guess would be maybe 300. But there are no records to prove that point. Once the Revolutionary War moved out of New England, the mid-Atlantic states seemed to be where most of the conflicts were. Here is a list of the men who served in the Revolutionary War from Osterville. I'm not talking about Centerville or Boston Mills, talking about Osterville. That's all I can deal with at my age of life. I don't know if they ever fired a gun, except maybe in target practice. There could be more, but with years of research, these are the names I found. In regards to the men listed here, who served, as they got older and were asked to recall their time of service and where, in order to get paid or some compensation, most of them couldn't remember where and when. Sounds a little bit like today as we advance in years. The first name here, Cornelius Lovell, served at Castle Island. I have no idea where that is. I think it's in the Boston area. His old home is now the location of Armstrong Kelly Park. Get this little gadget here. The next fella here is Captain. It's on his gravestone at Hillside Cemetery. Captain Jacob Lovell. I believe his old home was out near on the left-hand side just before Swift Avenue. That home used to be at the old home there on the left, used to be at the corner of Swift Avenue, but I think it's the third house back. It's been moved and it's got a big high brick foundation. I think that's where he lived. He served at an alarm up in Bedford, Dartmouth, and Falmouth. The next name, Joshua Lovell. I think his old home was on the corner of Bates Street and East Bay Road. I believe it's still there. As you go down Bates Street, turn right. That's his home, Joshua Lovell. He served at Bedford, Dartmouth, and Falmouth. All right. Memphis Hinckley. His old home is the third house today on Bay Street, where the flagpole is. That's Bay Street. It's all been renovated. A couple, I didn't see them this past summer. I think they year-round live out in the Las Vegas area. But this is Memphis Hinckley. He served in the Elizabeth Islands, Narshawn Islands. He served at an alarm up in Bedford, Dartmouth, and Falmouth. This is the oldest known likeness of an Osterville person, Memphis Hinckley. A fifth-generation grandson would have been the late Albert Hinckley of Osterville, former chief of police of the town of Barnstable. Abner Hinckley. He was very confused at his old age. He marched from Barnstable to Cambridge. He remembered General Putnam, helped build breastworks at Leechmere Point. I think that's in the Boston area somewhere. He marched from Barnstable to Narshawn Island. Let me get rid of this guy. Okay. Just let that stay there. He was stationed at Woods Hole, guarding the coast. He marched again from Barnstable to the Elizabeth Islands. He signed all his papers using the letter X. His stone in Hillside Cemetery says the following: Abner Hinckley died 1834. As I was once, as you are now, as I am now, so you must be. Prepare to die and follow me. Very encouraging words. I wonder who the last person was who could remember Abner Hinckley. In an article in the Barnstable Patriot, dated March 18th, 1840, I came across this. Died in Osterville, Mr. Levi Kelly Sr., a Revolutionary War. He was receiving a pension, age 86 years old. I believe he lived with his son, Levi Kelly Jr. At the time of his passing. This is his home. This was Levi Kelly Jr.'s home. Now you say, where on earth was that? Well, if you go along Main Street heading west, go past Fire Station Road, go past Cazalt's, the next house is a fairly modern house. If you come out of Pond Street and go right across the road, there's where Levi Kelly Jr. passed away. Levi Kelly Jr. lived, and his father apparently lived with him. That's what the house looked like in 1890. That's all I know about Senior Levi Kelly Sr. Okay. Benjamin Hallett, the last one here. Benjamin Hallett was only 16 when called to serve. Was on sea and land forces. He served at Falmouth, North Shore Island, Elizabeth Islands, Martha's Vineyard, also Tarpaulin Cove. He served on the brig Thomas. He was impressed onto the frigate Dean. That means was forced into public service as a seaman. Served along the Virginia coast, also the West Indies. I believe he saw the most service of the men mentioned. Was married. He had 12 daughters and one son. He took part in the dedication of the Bunker Hill Monument. A seventh generation granddaughter would be Gail Nightingale, who owns the Daniel Block. I hope I'm stating that right. Who owns the Daniel Block in the village. She would be a seventh generation granddaughter of Benjamin Hallett. Now, where did he live? If you know where some of these nice ladies sit in that park uptown by the plane tree, to the right of that's the driveway that goes up. I think it's called the Sylvia Building. Well, if you went up there to where the condominiums are, you would get to them from Tower Hill. That's where the Hallett house used to be. And again, he had 12 daughters, and it had many additions to it. And in 1901, the house burned to the ground. So I believe Benjamin Hallett saw the most service of any of the fellows in the Revolutionary War from Osterville. Now, in regards to the War of 1812, there were patriotic rallies held at Liberty Pole Hill. Now you say, where's that? Better known today as Tower Hill Road. That's Tower Hill Road, going right up there. That's the old schoolhouse, the church in downtown Osterville, taken about 1880. And that's where the patriotic rallies were held during the War of 1812, somewhere up and beyond the present healthcare center. If you can remember the old water tower in that area, that's where the rallies were held. It was a high point in the village. Years ago, village women would go up and look towards the ocean to see if the schooners or ships their husbands were on had arrived back safely. This is very important now. At the close of the War of 1812, Lovell's neighborhood, or Oyster Island, became known as Osterville. In my years of research at the courthouse, I never found the name Osterville recorded in the land deeds. Only the names Lovell's neighborhood and Oyster Island were used when land ownership changed hands. I never found Osterville. I believe the name Osterville was perhaps a slang name for this area due to the oysters in this area. That's the best information I can give you on that particular subject. So they took out the Y and called it Osterville. These are the men from Osterville who served in the War of 1812. A minute, I'll be right with you. Got them here somewhere. There they are. I hope you can all see that. These are the fellows that served in the War of 1812. There was William Blount, Charles Bolt, George Lovell, and Stephen West. William Blount served in the British Navy. He was not in the American forces. Was on the British frigate Guerriere, if you know your history of the War of 1812, when it encountered the U.S. frigate USS Constitution in the famous naval battle off Newfoundland. He was captured. Family tradition says he jumped overboard when the Constitution entered Boston Harbor. He ended up in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, then to Osterville in 1815. He married a lady from Chatham. He made bunks for whale oil barrels. His old home is the last home on the right before Pond Street. So you go by Midway Garage, you go by the fire station, but on the opposite side, I don't know who lives there now. It's a little white house there, and then the next road would be Pond Street. That's where William Blount lived. He left the Blount cane to be held by Osterville's oldest resident, the Historical Society, as custodian of the cane and also the determining board who is to receive the cane. Now, you might wonder, I wasn't going to show this, but you might wonder Are there any descendants of William Blount? Well, I happen to be. Here it is. William Blount, his daughter, Eliza, married a Crocker from Masters Mills. They had one son. She died of consumption, Clarendon Crocker. He had three sons, Willis Crocker. That's my grandfather. My mother was Grace Crocker. Some of you remember her. She ran a florist business on Scudder Road. And me. So I'm 6 generations from this character here. William Blount. Okay. The next one is Charles Bolt. He married Rebecca Lovell. He was born. That's his wife. There's no picture of Charles Bolt. He died before the years of photography. Bolt was born in Amsterdam, Holland in 1783. Came to America in 1791, and in 1806, he married Rebecca Lovell. He was captured on the high seas and held in Dartmoor prison in Devonshire, England, until the end of the war. Once home, after the war, he found his wife had given birth to triplets. Mary, Martha, and Mercy. What a surprise. No wonder he died suddenly in 1835. He had other children as well. Now, a 5th generation grandson would have been Mr. Leonard, Philip Leonard. I thought maybe his daughter would be here today, Judy. But if you remember Philip Leonard, this Charles Bolt would have been his. This is one of the triplets. Now you got to remember, this was taken when she was an old lady. They didn't have photography back in when she was born. We only have pictures of 2 of the twins, Martha, and this one, and Mary. He had other children as well. Next. George Lovell was born in the old Cornelius Lovell home. I've mentioned this, now location of Armstrong Kelly Park. He was also captured by the British and held in Dartmoor prison in Devonshire, England. He was an entrepreneur here in Osterville and the owner of many vessels. His old home, still standing, is at the corner of Main Street and East Bay Road. The present owner is the owner of Wayfair Furniture. So we're all that remodeling and dredging out that body of water. That was George Lovell's home. He was a very successful businessman. The last one who served in the War of 1812 was Stephen West. His old home is directly across the street from Midway Garage, that old Cape Cod house. I don't know any more about him than that. He had a large family. I also found this little footnote years ago among some of the old records I had, stating that during the War of 1812, English ships lay in Tarpaulin Cove. I think that's Narshawn Island off Falmouth, sending barges down along the shores to plunder and capture men. This is what the article said. Peter Cammett, which would be an old Osterville name, and Ira Hinckley, maybe the article meant Lot Hinckley, boys of 12 years old, were on guard at certain places. The article went on to say maybe Oyster Harbors, ready to fire their guns, giving an alarm if any boats or ships were sighted. This was just an added footnote that I found about the War of 1812. Okay, Mexican War. How are we doing for time? The Mexican War, 1846 through 48. There was little recorded of Osterville men who were involved in the Mexican War. Only 3 men that I know of: Josiah A. Ames, James West, and Henry Nelson Lewis. After the war was over, Josiah Ames went to California, and he was in the gold rush. You can read all about that very fascinating story in volume 2. This was the ship that he served on during the Mexican War. On his return, he served in the Civil War. He must have liked to fight. His maternal grandson was Chester Ames Crosby Sr., who perhaps some of you can recall. James West, records say, was a farmer. Now, James West's old house was the last house on the right before you turn into Joshua's Pond. The Manis lived there when I was a young fella. He then moved up into the center of the village and lived where the Osterville hardware store is. That was James West, not this fella here. The other man was Henry Nelson Lewis. As a young man, he went to sea. During the war, he served on the U.S. frigate Savannah. His old home has been added on to many, many times. Corner of Main Street and Fire Station Road. When I was a youngster delivering papers, a fellow by the name of John Rosa lived there. You go by the fire station, then comes Fire Station Road. Last I knew, it had a for sale sign in front of the house. Then would come another house, then Cazals. I also have the privilege here today of having one of this man's great nephews here in our group. I told this fellow many times if he had recorded or written about his grandfather, Ed Harvey Lewis, this was Ed Harvey Lewis's uncle. But he didn't bother to do that. So, Peter, I don't mean to pick on you. But that would be the fellow that's here today. This is his great uncle. Henry Nelson Lewis served on board the U.S. frigate Savannah. Okay, now when we get to the Civil War, there are more town records that you can find. When the Civil War started, men from Osterville were involved in the draft. They were drafted. But only those names in volume 1, way over, are recorded by the town of Barnstable who served. You can read in volume 1 some of the men who were drafted but didn't serve for whatever reason. Of these names, the following men served on the front lines. Their battles are all recorded in volume 1. I just couldn't write down every single fight they were in. This is a tough picture. This is the same fellow that went to the Mexican War and the California Gold Rush. This is Josiah Ames. His old house is still standing. It's the last house on the left before the bridge goes over to Oyster Harbors. That was Josiah Ames's home. He served in the Mexican War and he served in the Civil War. And you can read all about the battles he was in. The next one is Clarence Baker. He served in the Civil War. I don't have any picture of him in a military uniform. And he was the last veteran from the Civil War to die in 1931. Now, he lived on Parker Road. I think Charlie and Ann Needs live one of the houses that this Clarence Baker had. And if some of you remember Chester Wyman, he used to work at the post office here in Osterville. This would be his great-grandfather. Chester's mother was a baker. Warren Cammett served in the Civil War. He lived, how am I going to explain this? It's a real estate office now, it's right across from the flagpole. So you go down by the flagpole and it's at the corner of Parker Road, and I don't know the name of the real estate agent, but his old home was right there. It was taken down years ago. Warren Cammett. Charles Ellis. He was wounded. Now, why he's included? Because that doesn't sound like an Osterville name. I think he was from Forestdale or Sandwich, but he might have been living in Osterville at the time because he was married to the half-sister of that Mr. Lewis, Henry Nelson Lewis. His wife was a Lewis. So I think that's why he's included in the Osterville men that are recorded in the town hall who served in the Civil War. The next one is Mr. Fuller, David Fuller. He was wounded in the Civil War. I was hoping as I look over here, I don't see his great-granddaughter, but she lives down on Washington Street, Mrs. Tavilla. I don't know if I pronounced it right, but this is her father's, Gordon Fuller's grandfather. He was wounded in the Civil War. How do you like this character? He was Jimmy Jones. He was wounded in the leg in the Civil War. Somebody's telephone, and your telephone is ringing. It's all right, Ann. We still like you. Don't worry about it. Jimmy Jones, his old house was torn down years ago. If you go out of town, there's a road on the right. I think it's called Calumet Lane or something like that. Just before that was where he lived, John Sousa. He had a son, Clarky Sousa, but the house was torn down. That's where Jimmy Jones lived. All right. The next one that served in the Civil War was Mr. Lovell. He was wounded very severely. he was brought up in the old Robert Lovell house, which is now the location of Crisp Pizzeria, or what you call it. That's where the old Robert Lovell, this is his youngest son, Howard Lovell. He was killed at West Barnstable Railroad crossing in 1888 while on the way to a Grand Army of the Republic reunion. His horse and wagon was hit by a train. You can read about this tragedy in volume 2. It's quite an extensive volume. He and another man was both killed. The next man, I gotta put the Civil War guys up here. I haven't even got them. I'm sorry. Still looking. Sorry about that. When you get old, you make mistakes. Okay. We're down to Howard Lovell. Now, the next man is Harrison Finney. Don't know too much about him, but his old home was the location of the present site of the Osterville Village Library. Years later, it became the home of Israel Crocker, who ran Crocker's store in Osterville. The home a number of years ago was moved over to First Avenue and was cut in half. A part of it was taken apart. And it's over on First Avenue. That's Harrison Finney. The next fellow is James Small. I don't know just exactly where he lived in Osterville, but he did live here. He had grandsons. Maybe you can remember. Henry Small was a grandson, Carlton Small, and Webster Small. This is their grandfather. And he was participated in the Battle of Mobile Bay. He saw quite a lot of service while he was in the Civil War. As far as I know, there are no Spanish-American War men from Osterville. Most of the men were known as Rough Riders, came from the Midwest or other Southwest states or territories. Wait a minute. All right. I don't need one of those. By World War I, Osterville had grown, and we have the records of the men and women who served. The names are recorded on the memorial stone at the flagpole. So if you ever want, get out of your car, go up on that little circle up there, and you will see the names of the men and women who served in World War I. Now, however, due to time, I'm going to highlight those who went overseas. I don't mean to neglect the others. Their names and time were much appreciated as well. You can read all about World War I in regards to Osterville in Volume 1. Tells you all about it. I could stay here for hours, and I know you don't want to listen to me for hours. So, this is the old library. It's now part of the Osterville Hardware. This is one of the old Lovell homes. All of these two buildings now encompass the Osterville Hardware store. That flag was there during World War I, and all those little stars represent the men and women from Osterville who served in World War I. So this is Main Street, probably 1917. Okay, Morris Allen was in the Navy, made several trips from this country, from the US over to France. Where he lived when I knew him was now Schultz Law Office. That's where this man lived. He had 2 daughters and a son. Now, these are the fellows, the next 4 men, the next 4 men were the men, as far as I can determine, who were combat veterans of World War I. 3 of them were gassed. They participated in such battles as Chateau Thierry, Argonne Forest, Daman, St. Miguel, Musa Argonne, and Belleau Woods, and others. Leo Beaumont, his niece, lives here in Osterville. Her name is Alice Batson. She was a Beaumont. This would be her father's brother. Combat veteran of the war. He eventually died as a result of mustard gas. These 2 fellows here, seated, is Malcolm Crosby, who I tape recorded, and his brother Carol. Carol Crosby was gassed in the World War I, the Battle of Chateau Thierry. His brother, unfortunately, went through the whole war. I saw a tremendous amount of fighting. I tape recorded him. He was a character to tape record. On 2 of his recordings I made, he said, "Paul, I got on a ship that sailed to Halifax, Nova Scotia, and the food was rotten." That was one of I can remember that. The tape recording is over at the Historical Society. Then, while Max here, the one seated, served in the front lines, the fellow beside him was shot and killed. Well, Max wasn't laughing about that. He says, "They couldn't get me." Then he'd laugh about it. Ha, 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 ha. I guess they tried to get me, he said, but they couldn't. So he was quite an interesting man, Malcolm, the one seated in his old home when I knew him was where the Citizens Bank. It's now over on Lovell's Road. These 2 fellows here saw a tremendous amount of service, combat service in World War I. The other one was Ed Daniel. He was gassed in World War I. He had to flee to the Southwest because of the climate conditions. His great niece works downstairs at the reception desk, Kathy Wright. This would be her father's uncle. I knew him, but when he retired, he came back here to live. I knew who he was, but not that much. Another fella, oh, this is a lady. This is Marion Childs. She was a nurse, served in France during World War I. The second man on the second end on the right was Joseph Daniel. Saw combat while he was in the Navy, and he married the previous lady. That's his wife. They got married later. Joseph Daniel, and for years he ran Daniel Brothers, along with his older brother's construction firm. That would be Kathy's great uncle. I think I got that right. Shirley Evans. To my knowledge, he didn't go to the front, but he was in France for about a year and a half. Some of you remember Perk Evans, lived here in Osterville. This would be his uncle. Served in France in World War One. James Hansberry served over in France. Two of his daughters come in here quite often. Martha, she walks around the village a lot. And Susan Jacobson. This is their father, served in France, but I don't think he participated in the front. This is his sister. And she was a nurse in France in World War I. We're getting to the close. Cecil Goodspeed was in the Navy. Made several trips back and forth from here over to France. He ran an insurance business on Parker Road. Jesse Murray. His daughter happens to hold the Blount cane at the present time. Edna Farrington served overseas. Whiteley, William Whiteley. He was accidentally gassed over in France. He was only there a couple of months while in training. He was gassed. This was my grandmother Crocker's. My grandmother Crocker was a Whiteley. This is one of her brothers. I don't know whether that's the last one or not. Okay. This is the flag raising ceremony. The church, Baptist church, is there to the left. The flag ceremony would be where that little park is, where you nice ladies sit. That's where it was before my time. That's where it was. And here's a celebration of the flag raising. Here it is. That's the flagpole. I don't know if that London plane tree is there or not. But this was the ceremony held, I presume, 1918, maybe shortly thereafter. Here it is again. And in the background, you can see this is the Daniel block in the background. And again, it was where that little area where those park benches are. It was later transferred the flagpole up to up where the country store used to be. There's the World War I honor roll. That was up in the village. It'd be to the right of Five Bays Bistro. It used to be right in that area. Those are the men in World War I. These are some pictures I found. A lot of people haven't seen these. These are the victory celebration. You can read about it in Volume 1. Baptist Church background is in the background. I believe this is lady with the flag. I believe that's Sarah Alley. And I believe she married Carol Crosby, one of the fellows that was gassed severely in the war. This is a celebration of the victory in World War I. There's Main Street. You can see the word, it's the word garage. The chimney here is the location of I think that chimney's still there. That's part of the house and garden. The Lagrugans had a garage there. They had wooden sidewalks. And you can read in Volume 1 of the victory celebration. My mother, who was born and raised in Osterville, was a teenager And when she passed away, she was way in her 90s. She used to tell me some of her remembrances. And this was a big event for her because she remembered this victory celebration as a teenager. And she said that right behind Cotton Realty, what is it now? Sotheby's, there's a hollow. So if you go down Packer Road, turn left on Sunset Lane, right there on the left, there's a big hollow. And there was a big, you could read all about it in volume 1. There was a big bonfire there. My mother participated in it. She was a member of the Girl Scouts. And they sang Burn, Kaiser, Burn. That's all I can remember my mother telling me. But that was one of her favorite recollections as a teenage girl being brought up here in the village of Osterville. So that's it. Next fall, if Lord willing, if I'm alive, I would like to give a talk on men and some women from Osterville who went to sea. Very interesting. Some of them, of course, went to sea. They never came back. So if all goes well, and if the library wants it, they want all this recorded, they figure while I'm still alive, they'll record me. And the only reason I do all this is it's because of my mother's side. The name Chesbro has got nothing to do with all. My father came here, and he was a washer but met my mother. So my mother's from Osterville for many generations back. So it was her family where I developed this interest in the village history. Thank you all for coming. I have no idea what time it is. What time is it, Peter? Time is it?
About 2 o'clock.
Just about 1 hour.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. That's it. Yeah, I don't know if I can answer them, but.
I don't have a question for him, but an observation. I've seen the historic plaque. I think you said Josiah level at the corner of Bates and East Bay. That little house. It says 1778. Now that I know that
What house?
Was it Josiah level at East Bay and Bates?
Oh, Joshua.
Joshua. Okay.
Yeah.
That house, it says 1778, and if he was off the war, that's an interesting, I don't know the story, but that's an odd time to build a house if you're involved with.
Well, once again, by the time the news of the Revolutionary War got to this remote place, they probably all moved out of New England, they built South City. But the lady that owned that house did a lot of research on that. That's the date that she came up with.
Yeah.
Okay. Peter.
Yeah, well, congratulations, that was a wonderful talk. I enjoyed it so much, having grown up here.
Yeah.
I'm wondering when that enormous tree was always the biggest tree in Osterville, and it was right alongside what is now the hardware store, and the Huckabees lived there. Do you know when that was taken down or why?
Yeah, I do. I'd say in the 1960s. I thought you maybe were referring to that one by the park. That big tree by the park where the lady said, that's called a plane tree. London plane tree. It loses all its bark in the fall or late summer.
Yeah.
It's a mess.